Okay, so we are doing a Q&A because we only have one day instead of two. And yeah, so Q&A. So are we starting with that? Well, I guess we'll start with our own questions and then yeah. If such questions exist. Anyone? Are you consulting your yes. Questions? Okay, yeah, I figured. The hurried.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So sometimes people will say, and I don't know if this is like a right thing or wrong thing, people will say, Hashem yinkum damo.
Yeah.
Opposed to like Zechron Bracha or Alav Shalom.
Right.
Which tends to make us believe that like God should be vengeful in
right.
some cases. But then halach b'dracha of like it's an Isser deraisa, should be vengeful.
I gave a whole shir on this. Yeah. Yes. There is a shir that I gave. I have to decide whether I want to paraphrase it or not. Last year, I think, called, give me 1 second. Vengeance. Mechias Amalek, emulating a vengeful god. And it was this year. This was where's the date?
On the Synopsis 3.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah. This is earlier. Well, I guess it's not this year anymore. Last year. And it deals with that exact question, which is Hashem is called Kel Nakamos, God of vengeance, and yet it seems like it is also for us to take revenge. So I believe the trajectory of this year, as you can see, is heavily focused on the Ri Ibn Kaspi. So he has, if you take all the Ri Ibn Kaspis on vengeance, and then you take all the Rambams, then there's a sod of it's a weird kind of sod because it's not like a metaphysical sod, it is a ethical sod, which is not the typical thing. And it talks about the parameters of when we say that vengeance is good and when it's bad. I'm not going to spoil the shir, but I will show you where you can see this alluded to in the Rambam, which is Talmud Torah Zayin Yud Gimel. Talmud Torah Zion Yud Gimel, very, very end of Talmud Torah. Okay, yeah. So he says, this is the last chapter in Talmud Torah is about nidui, about ostracizing someone. So he says, so the early Hasidim would hear people insult them and they would not respond. Kind of touches on the other question, but they would forgive the insulter and pardon him. The great Chachamim would praise themselves about their actions and say that they never put a person in ostracization, I can never pronounce that word, or they can never excommunicate them. They never excommunicate them for their own honor. This is the way of Talmid Chachamim that is proper to emulate. But when is this talking about? That's when they disparaged them or insulted them in private. About Talmid Chachamim shebizuhu ocherfu adam b'farhesia. But if a Talmid Chachamim was disparaged or insulted by another person in public, asur lo limcho al kavoda, it is prohibited for the Talmid Chachamim to pardon his kavod, to forgive, to overlook his kavod. V'im machal, and if he does forgive him, nenash, he is punished. Mipnei shezeh bizayon Torah, because this is a degradation of Torah. Ela nokim v'noter hadavar kanachash. He should take vengeance and bear a grudge like a snake. Ad shivakish mimenu mechila v'yaslach, until the person requests forgiveness from him and then he forgives him. And I want to combine that with the other place where the Rambam alludes to this. So you see there, explicitly, Talmid Chacham has to do this, but then the Rambam also says in so in the actual Isser of Losikum Velositor, Hanokim Escavero over Belosase, someone who takes revenge against his fellow violates a Lotase. Shnemar, as it says, Lotikom, it says don't take revenge. The Alpha Pisha, Loke, even though you don't get whiplashes for this, Das Dea Ra'a, interesting. I was going to say Dea Ra'a because, so the Kafaf says Dea Ra'a. But he says das. Okay, but here, interesting. So the Shelat says umilim near dafosein. These are synonyms. So das here does not mean bad mentality. It means like character, or however you understand the Rambam in Deos. Das rahi anmo. This is a very bad dea, very bad trait. Elo roy ladam lios ma'avir al kol divrei ha'olam. Rather, it's proper for a person to pardon all worldly matters shehakol etzel hamavinim, because all of these things, in terms of the people who understand, are divrei hevel v'havai, are matters that are transient and like exaggerated of importance. The enam kidai linkom aleim, and they're not worthy of taking vengeance on. So I think you don't need the whole share to get stuff like this, but if you ask yourself, what would God be vengeful about, and then wherein would we be obligated to emulate him, and then say, well, and then how do you draw the line between that and where the Torah is prohibiting us to take revenge? Then you get the whole thing. But it's a good share to go through for, I know we still got a little while till Purim, but this was, I think I gave this around Purim. Yeah. So that's the general sketch of the answer. Yeah.
Okay.
So tying it to the original question, Hashem Yinkum Damam. So I think that you could look at that in two ways. I think that the vast majority of people who say that are just giving into the emotion that is us to, I mean, I'm not saying it's us for them to say that, but like, I think that most people are, I'm saying there's a great quote by, give me 1 second. Anne Lamott, God hates. Yeah, this is a great quote. You can safely assume you've created God in your own image, when it turns out that God hates all the same people you do. You know, so as opposed to Shlomo HaMelech, Ohave Hashem Sinu Ra. That's not Mishlei, that's Tehillim, right? Oh, Hashem Sinu Ra, a couple of Shabbos, right? There's another similar pasuk in Mishlei that it says that those who love God hate evil, right? So Rabbi Moskowitz always used to say that a lot of people who actually claim to hate evil or actually feel hatred towards evil is just coming from some personal emotion. But there is a hatred of evil that comes from Avas Hashem, but that's like a level. And I think the same thing with revenge. I think that, like, you know, there are personal vengeance emotions, which, by the way, is not, I'm not saying if people feel that way, then that's like a horrible thing. Like, you know, in next week's parsha, the Torah does talk about the institution of Arei Miklat, you know, and like, it is a natural thing. And Goel Hadam, you know, it is a natural thing when someone hurts your family, you know, either your direct family or like your you know, your Jewish family, whatever, then like, it's a natural thing to like want to take revenge. And to the point where the Torah actually like accommodates for that and tries to like redirect it. But I don't think that a person who says, you know, may God avenge their blood, I don't think that person, most people like that's stemming from an actual justice or actual like Avas Hashem or actual understanding of what that would even mean, you know. I think it's just a way to outlet it. And look, it's better than nothing. It is recognizing that justice belongs to God, even if in their heart they don't feel that way, but they're saying that. So I think it's like it's a positive thing, you know, in terms of like redirecting emotions. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Sean.
Okay. So the question is, we talk about how when like a person should work towards satisfying their emotions through engagement in Torah and the system.
Yeah.
And the question is, when that's not happening, or when one finds themselves getting a diminishing returns in terms of their emotional satisfaction.
Yeah.
With Torah, mitzvot, and their relationship with God, what should one be doing in order to further?
Okay, can you because that question is so broad, can you give me an example of the type of thing you're talking about? Like, you know, there's like, you like good food, so eat it on Shabbos, versus there's like, you know, don't speak Lashon Hara, get out your emotions some other way. Like, what's,
I would say more focusing on the connection with God.
Yeah.
Like, there's this fine line of, you shouldn't feel too connected to God, like God is your personal buddy, back in your corner,
right?
But you also shouldn't feel like abandoned by God, or like a disconnect in terms of your relationship, where the things that you're trying to be working on or asking for are just not coming to fruition, and then there's like a frustration there.
Right.
How do you...
specifically in a relationship with God.
Yeah,
that's a good question. Right. So finish your sentence. How do you...
So when you find yourself being not emotionally satisfied with your relationship with God, what are practical steps that you can be taking in order to work on reconnecting, and redeveloping that relationship, and enhancing it?
That's a great question. Okay, so there's a great book that I want to recommend to everyone. It's called Sefer Tehillim. okay, which has 150 chapters that all cultivate or help a person cultivate a relationship with God through all the ups and downs, and I know of no, I mean, okay, I guess if I were to speak categorically, then let me think if I could categorize this. I'm struggling between 2 and 3 categories. Let's start with 3 categories, and we might need to broaden this. So always there needs to be like a constant pursuit of EDS Hashem, right? Of knowledge of God, because ultimately our knowledge of God is going to be lacking, and that's going to be the source of a lot of problems and deficiencies that we have. So that goes without saying. On the other side, there's also like working on your own emotions independently, right? Which also has to be a constant thing. But then I think the area where your question is focused is on the intersection between the two. And I think the best route to take for that, the reason why I said Tehillim is seeing it modeled in other people, and you can see it modeled in other people in real world examples, like hearing people who have gone through, horrible things in their lives, or who are struggling with other things in their lives, and grappling with a relationship with Hashem. And I think that impacts you in a different way. Like, again, first example that comes to mind, I think last year, Mrs. Moskowitz gave like a 25-minute talk on, it's on YouTube somewhere, but on, I can look for it if you want, on the tragic death of her son and then losing her husband, and cases like that. Or like I heard on, I forgot it was the 1840 podcast, Orthodox Conundrum, that was a series that they took up from some, they interviewed a mother, I think whose family or kid was killed in a terrorist attack. And so hearing real world examples of this, I think, can be good models. But again, maybe it's just because I like Tehillim, but really going through and seeing how David coped with it when he was in situations like that, and then extrapolating and applying that to yourself. I think also it's important to recognize, I think there's like a fantasy that, this is a fantasy that's very universal, is the autopilot fantasy, that if I just get to a certain state, then it'll be smooth sailing from then on out. And I know the point that Jesse Fishbein always makes is that, we are called Yisrael because it means that you wrestled with God and prevailed. That the wrestling with God is the ideal in Judaism, not the ideal in the sense of strive to be in a state of conflict, but it's the model. That's like the paradigm, and that's the I know I've quoted this a bajillion times, but the Rav's Footnote 4, which again, those who haven't read Halakhic Man need to read Halakhic Man. But if you haven't read Footnote 4, that is, maybe it's fair to say this, it's more important than the Sefer. But I'll say that I've definitely read Footnote 4 way more than times than I've read the Sefer. Yeah. So is this long enough for us to read? Yeah, we'll read it right now because it's so important. Okay. And the Rav uses a bunch of Rav words, so we're not going to look them all up right now. For example, the antinomic structure of religious experience, which was revised and refined by Rudolf Otto in his book, The Idea of the Holy, gives the lie to the position that is prevalent nowadays in religious circles, whether in Protestant groups or in American Reform and Conservative Judaism. This is also going to pertain to the question. That's also why I want to read it. That the religious experience is of a very simple nature, that is, devoid of spiritual tortuousness present in the secular cultural consciousness, of psychic upheavals, and of the pangs and torments that are inextricably connected with the development and refinement of man's spiritual personality. This popular ideology contends that the religious experience is tranquil and neatly ordered, tender and delicate. It is an enchanted stream for embittered souls and still waters for troubled spirits. The person who comes in from the field weary, from the battlefield and campaigns of life, from the secular domain, which is filled with doubts and fears, contradictions and reputations, clings to religion as does a baby to its mother, and finds in her lap a shelter for his head, a nest for his forsaken prayers. And there is comforted for his disappointments and tribulations. This ideology is partially embedded in the most ancient strata of Christianity, partially rooted in modern pragmatic philosophy, but mainly it stems from practical utilitarian considerations. The advocates of religion wish to exploit the rebellious impulse against knowledge, which surges from time to time in the soul of the man of culture, the yearning to be freed from the bonds of culture, that daughter of knowledge which weighs heavily on man with its questions, doubts, and problems, and the desire to escape from the turbulence of life to a magical, still, and quiet island, and there to devote oneself to the ideal of naturalness and vitality. This Rousseauian ideology left its stamp on the entire Romantic movement from the beginning of its growth until its final tragic manifestations in the consciousness of contemporary man. Therefore, the representatives of religious communities are inclined to portray religion in a wealth of colors that dazzle the eye as a poetic Arcadia, a realm of simplicity, wholeness, and tranquility. Most of the sermons of the revivalists, that means like the American revivalists, are divided in equal measure between depicting the terrors of hellfire and describing the utopian tranquility that religion can bestow upon man. And that which appears in the sermons of these preachers in a primitive, garbled form, at times interwoven with a childish naivete and superficial belief, is refined and purified in the furnace of popular philosophy and theology, and becomes transformed into a universal religious ideology which proclaims, if you wish to acquire tranquility without paying the price of spiritual agonies, turn unto religion. If you wish to achieve a fine psychic equilibrium without having to first undergo a slow, gradual personal development, turn unto religion. And if you wish to achieve an instant spiritual wholeness and simplicity that need not be forged out of the struggles and torments of consciousness, turn unto religion. Get thee out of thy country, which is filled with anxiety, anguish, and tension, and from thy birthplace, which is so frenzied, raging, and stormy, to the land that is enveloped by the stillness of peace and tranquility, to the Arcadia wherein religion reigns supreme. The leap from the secular world to the religious world could not be simpler and easier. There's no need for a process of transition with all its torments and upheavals. A person can acquire spiritual tranquility in a single moment. Typical of this attitude is the Christian Science movement. It would appear to me that there is no need to explain the self-evident falsity of this ideology. First, the entire romantic aspiration to escape from the domain of knowledge, the rebellion against authority of objective scientific cognition, which has found its expression in the biologistic philosophies of Bergson, Nietzsche, Spengler, Klages, I don't know what that is, and their followers, and in the phenomenological, existential, and anti-scientific school of Heidegger and his coterie, and from the midst of which there arose in various forms the sanctification of vitality and intuition, the veneration of instinct, the desire for power, the glorification of the emotional affective life, and the flowing surging stream of subjectivity, the lavishing of extravagant praise on the Faustian type and the Dionysian personality, etc., have brought complete chaos and human depravity to the world. And let the events of the present era be proof. The individual who frees himself from the rational principle and who casts off the yoke of objective thought will in the end turn destructive and lay waste the entire created order. Therefore, it is preferable that religion should ally itself with the forces of clear logical cognition as uniquely exemplified in the scientific method, even though at times the two might clash with one another, rather than pledge its troth to beclouded, mysterious ideologies that grope in the dark corners of existence, unaided by the shining light of objective knowledge, and believe that they have penetrated to the secret core of the world. And second, this ideology is intrinsically false and deceptive. This is getting back to what you were saying. That religious consciousness in man's experience, which is most profound and most elevated, which penetrates to the very depths and ascends to the very heights, is not that simple and comfortable. On the contrary, it is exceptionally complex, rigorous, and tortuous. Where you find its complexity, there you find its greatness. The religious experience from beginning to end is antinomic and antithetic. The consciousness of homo religiosus, that's religious man, flings bitter accusations against itself and immediately is filled with regret, judges its desires and yearnings with excessive severity, and at the same time steeps itself in them, casts derogatory aspersions on its own attributes, flails away at them, but also subjugates itself to them. It is in a condition of spiritual crisis, of psychic ascent and descent, of contradiction arising from affirmation and negation, self-abnegation and self-appreciation. The ideas of temporality and eternity, knowledge and choice, knowledge and choice, necessity and freedom, love and fear, the yearning for God and the flight from his glorious splendor, incredible, overbold daring, and an extreme sense of humility, transcendence, and God's closeness, the profane and the holy, etc., struggle within his religious consciousness, wrestle and grapple with each other. This one ascends, and this one descends, this one falls, and this one rises. Now here's my favorite paragraph. Religion is not, at the outset, a refuge of grace and mercy for the despondent and desperate, an enchanted stream for crushed spirits, but a raging, clamorous torrent of man's consciousness with all its crises, pangs, and torments. Yes, it is true that during the third Sabbath meal at dusk, as the day of rest declines and man's soul yearns for its creator and is afraid to depart from that realm of holiness whose name is Sabbath into the dark and frightening secular workday week, we sing the psalm, Hashem ro'i lo echsar, binos desha yarbiteni al me'menus haleni. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters, etc., etc. And we believe with our entire hearts in the ultimate destination of homo religiosus, not the path leading to that destination. For the path that will eventually lead to the green pastures and to the still waters is not the royal road, but a narrow, twisting footway that threads its course along the steep mountain slope as the terrible abyss yawns at the traveler's feet. Many see, quote, the Lord passing by, and a great and strong wind rending mountains and shattering rocks, and after the wind an earthquake, and after the earthquake a fire, but only a few prove worthy of hearing the still small voice. Out of the straits of inner oppositions and incongruities, spiritual doubts and uncertainties, out of the depth of a psyche rent with antinomies and contradictions, out of the bottomless pit of a soul that struggles with its own torments, I have called unto thee, O Lord. And when the Torah testified that Israel in the end would repent out of anguish and agony, quote, in your distress when all these things are come upon you, you will return to the Lord your God. It had in mind not only physical pain, but also spiritual suffering, the pangs of searching and groping, the tortures of spiritual crises and exhausting treks of the soul, purify and sanctify man, cleanse his thoughts, and purge them of the husks of superficiality and the dross of vulgarity. Out of these torments, there emerges a new understanding of the world, a powerful spiritual enthusiasm that shakes the very foundations of man's existence. He arises from the agonies, purged and refined, possessed of a pure heart and a new spirit. It is a time of agony unto Jacob, but out of it he shall be saved, i.e., from out of the very midst of the agony itself, he will attain eternal salvation and redemption. The spiritual stature and countenance of the man of God are chiseled and formed by the pangs of redemption themselves. Now, I'm going to pretend that the reason why I read this is not because I forgot how long it is, but I wanted to say that the Rav is underscoring the fact that this is what I meant when I said it's the ideal or the model, that I think there is a feeling that these crises and struggles and torments and darkness is like something that should be gotten rid of or fled from. But the Rav is saying something that needs to be leaned into, because that's where you actually grow religiously. And that's where you actually grow in your relationship with God. So I think any approach that aims to like annihilate those feelings or deny them or turn away from them is destined for failure. And it's also not Jewish, and I think that there are two brands of this. The brand that he speaks the most against in this is like the Christian, like stereotypically religious, like homo religiosus type thing, where like viewing a relationship with God as being like idyllic and tranquil and like at peace, but I think we in this yeshiva, and I'm not turning off the recording, I think we are prone to the other side of the coin, which is ignoring the religiosity and the feelings and the emotional component of your relationship with God, and trying to get all of that just from the cognitive sphere, and that's why again, I think that the book that everyone needs to learn, but for different reasons, is Tehillim, because Tehillim takes the people who are inclined towards the homo religiosus path and actually like anchors it in actual knowledge of God and models for people what it is like to struggle with those things in a framework of knowledge. But then the reason why in our yeshiva we need Tehillim is because we're inclined to just neglect developing our religious emotions and just think that it could all be addressed through knowledge. And when I say address, I mean either there are people who just ignore the whole dimension of like religious feelings, and then there's, I think, the more common thing of like, oh, just like learn and like it'll take care of itself. Well, then why did David write a 150 chapter book that deals with it? Why do you have Sefer Eov that deals with another side of the question, which is when bad things happen to you, what do you do with your relationship with God? Why does Koheles deal with the other side of it, which is in terms of the struggle with human happiness and your relationship with God? Like we deal with this in our religion, So I think like learning those Sfarim, and then also reading from, I guess this is the third option. I said one option is like hearing testimony from people who have gone through this. The other is the like pure limud haTorah, but applying it to yourself. And then the third option is finding people, not that, this is like the, I quoted this recently, like the Ram says like there are certain groups that are so small that you can't call them a group, like he says, like the sun is a group, like with one member, that people like the Rav who are a gadol b'Torah and like holding in Yedias Hashem and writing about like their own like emotional like struggles with this, who do it like so articulately, so like reading from people who do that. And there are other people who do that. Like, I mean, I've seen from Rav Lichtenstein writing stuff about, about religious consciousness, and there are other people, but yeah. So I think those are the routes. And look, like, just talking about it with people, even people like, even like peers who don't have that solution for themselves, just talking about it is like a great way to process it, so yeah, if I think more, I'll let you know, but I think those are, yeah, Isaac?
Different question?
Sorry, I took so long on that, but it's important.
Yeah.
It means that to turn to an audiobook on Footnote 4, but I'm glad it exists now. Yeah, Isaac.
Yeah. Well, first I just wanted to say, like, wow, about the Footnote 4.
Right?
I mean, I've read slash heard it before, but yeah. But totally different question.
Yeah, sure.
So Torah has a lot of, like, I'd say halakhic structures for different major life events.
Yeah.
Right. So I was thinking about, I don't think that, I don't know of anything about like a job transition. You know,
Interesting.
like
people had lifetime jobs back then.
Yeah. Or
yeah.
I think it was much less, major of a deal. Do you have any thoughts about how to think about that?
It's a good question. I don't have specific thoughts, but I will tell you where to look. I think because job transitions involve a lot of insecurity around like parnasa and livelihood, then I think areas that touch on the topic of trust in Hashem about your parnasa, as opposed to trust in human beings about your parnasa, would be a fruitful area to look at. I know that's not the only emotion involved in job transitions, but I think that would be one. And then I think another area is, you have the broad concept of galus is mechaperes avon, that exile atones for iniquity. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that when you plunge yourself into a new environment, then it brings up a lot of opportunities for conflict and reflection and like examining like imperfections that have like remained out of the picture until now. I think that it could be, in other words, I think it could be used as a vehicle for tשובה. And I know starting a new job is not galus, but like, again, you got to think back then, all the jobs that you would have had would have been like in your town or your city, and like, taking a new job and immersing yourself in a completely new set of people and like a new identity and stuff like that. I think those topics like definitely overlap. Those are the first two things that come to mind, but I'll have to think about it some more.
Yeah. I like the analogy to galus, because to a certain extent it is like, I'm going to be starting over with new people that I, haven't built up a relationship with, haven't built up credibility. Like, I'm going to have to, work on, building up, credibility and reputation, and all that. Like, you gotta like start from scratch.
I'll tell you a third answer, which is a weird answer, and I don't know how fruitful this will be for you, but like there are a lot of examples in Torah of people who struggled with new jobs, right? Moshe Rabbeinu being assigned the mission to go to redeem Klal Yisrael, Yonah being given his mission to go to Nineveh, David and Melech, in his struggling with the Malchus. What did you say? Yirmiyahu, right? Also not wanting to go on his mission. Shmuel having to do things that, like announcing to Shaul that he, that he's out of the job. Like there are a lot of examples of people struggling with particular jobs. And yeah, those are very high level people and those are very high level jobs. So I don't know how much can be like extrapolated for like the day to day, but like, it's an area maybe to look.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, David?
Thanks.
Yeah.
One other thing I don't know if this is at all helpful, but to me, sometimes if I have, say, a similar type of situation where something that is on my mind a lot, and not particular to the job switching thing, that I'll look into fiat or other areas where I've already had like general, broad, like objective ideas that had not at previous times related to me personally.
Yeah.
And then take those ideas that I hadn't been thinking about in a very just like overall objective sense, and then seeing how my personal situation plays into that, which I've already been learning.
Yeah.
And then I can actually relate to that a lot better. I think it does well for me at this moment, and then for also future times. That then I can, when this wears off, I can actually go back into this part of Tefillah, let's say.
Yeah.
And then see it in 2 years and still.
That's actually a great point. That reminds me of something that I would suggest as well, which is something I do. I wrote a educational philosophy statement when I first started teaching, and I try to review it at least once a year. But then when I took a new high school teaching job this year, after being out of the high school classroom for 3 years, and then I revisited like my educational philosophy statement, it was a very good reminder of like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And I think new jobs are an opportunity for examining those bigger pictures of like, what is my philosophy of work in general, or how does what I'm doing for Parnassa also fit into the world at large in terms of like what I'm doing for society, So I think that's another good, like that's definitely in line with Torah in terms of examining why you work. I mean, is on Shabbos, you should be examining why is it that you're like working through the 6 days. I don't know if you're more than okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I like that. I think I like just to talk about like using it as an opportunity to like re-examine it's like my relationship with work also.
Yeah. All right. Good. Okay. So let's tackle this big question. So the background of this question is that this is a question asked to David by someone was brought up in a Christian background and is now what do you call it? Like being introduced to Torah ideas. So I'm going to read the question as it was sent. Okay, and is this a question? Was this from her notes, or is this the form she sent it to you in?
This is in an email chain.
Email chain. Okay, fine.
Copied from the email.
Okay, fine. So there is a larger context to this, which might play into this, which is why David needs to be here also. Which is
with a mixture of email chain and also Zoom meetings.
Okay, so when sorry, wait a second here.
This is in response to listening to one of the shooting.
Okay. So when a person's emotions override their ability to think clearly, for example, after they've done something terrible, like hurt other people, and to move forward in life, they need a source of comfort and forgiveness. That seems to be a strong entry point to Christianity. In fact, I am recognizing that so much of that religion is designed to address hurt people's emotional needs rather than their intellect. What are your thoughts on that? And how would you propose someone who is in pain obtain the sense of forgiveness they need to feel okay in order to carry on? I guess I'm implying, maybe naively, that a person has to have their emotional needs satisfied before their intellectual needs when they're in pain. At least that's something I've witnessed. I'm speaking freely here because the concept of forgiveness is so huge, and my whole life it's been implied that this is an absolute need. Now, David sent me this question. Well, I got it this morning. I got it earlier, but like I got it to address this morning. I haven't had a chance to think about it. One of the difficulty things in Q&As, if you ever find yourself in a Q&A situation, is extracting the question from the way it's asked, and this is particularly difficult. When I was walking over here and I read it, I guessed that there were like maybe 2 or 3 questions in here, and just for kicks, when I got here, I just put it into ChatGPT and asked it to parse, to decipher the question, So this is what it said, okay? And I'm reading this just because I think we need to pick which direction we're going to take. So it says, this inquiry touches on several complex and intertwined topics, including the role of emotions in decision-making, the psychological appeal of religion, especially Christianity, and the importance of forgiveness and personal healing. The question can be broken down to several key points. 1, emotional overriding of rational thought. The question begins by recognizing a situation where emotions overpower rational thinking, especially after someone has caused harm to others. This premise sets the stage for discussing how individuals seek comfort and forgiveness in such situations. So that's an independent, very Mishlaic question. Okay, like just what do you do when your emotions overpower rational thinking? Like what approach needs to be taken like in general before we get to the specifics. 2, Christianity as a source of comfort and forgiveness. The questioner observes that Christianity seems particularly effective in addressing the emotional needs of hurt individuals rather than focusing primarily on intellectual aspects. This observation leads to a broader question about the role of religion in providing emotional solace. I don't know if I agree with that reading of it because the ChatGPT says that Christianity seems particularly effective. The text of the question was, this seems to be a strong entry point to Christianity. So I don't know if that means that Christianity is good at doing this or if people fall into Christianity through this, whether or not it's good. Like they seek this from Christianity. 3, thoughts on religion addressing emotional needs. The questioner is seeking the opinion on the observation that Christianity and perhaps religion in general is more about meeting emotional needs than intellectual ones, especially in the context of providing forgiveness and comfort. Okay, so that is what is the role of religion? And that's going to be dually complex. ChatGPT doesn't know that Judaism is a different kind of religion, that it's a regimen that brings those who practice properly to true human success, which is knowledge of God to the extent that that's humanly possible. That's the Rabbi's definition of Torah. So like, this has to be split into 3A and 3B in terms of like what people are seeking from religion in general, and then how that plays out in Torah, which is a regimen for perfection in the kli of a religion. Okay, 4 ways to obtain forgiveness and feel okay. There's a practical aspect of the question asking for suggestions on how someone in pain can achieve a sense of forgiveness and emotional relief, which is necessary for moving forward. Okay, I don't think that was really the main point of the question, but it's definitely a topic that's touched upon. 5, emotional needs versus intellectual needs in time of pain. The question reflects on their own observation or belief that satisfying emotional needs is a priority over intellectual needs when a person is in pain. This is an implication rather than a direct question, inviting thoughts on the perspective. Okay, that's well said. And 6, the concept of importance of forgiveness. Finally, the question touches on the broader, more philosophical aspect of forgiveness. The questioner shares a personal background where the concept of forgiveness has been emphasized as a critical need throughout their life. Then summary here. Overall, the question is inviting a discussion on the psychological appeal and role of religion, specifically Christianity, in providing emotional solace and forgiveness, and whether this approach is effective or necessary, especially in situations where individuals are overwhelmed by emotions. They are also curious about the balance between emotional and intellectual fulfillment in the process of healing and seeking forgiveness. So I want to ask David, first of all, whether, again, we didn't see the whole context, and by we I mean me and ChatGPT didn't see the whole context of the question. So I guess which of these 6 aspects, should we focus on in the remaining 9 minutes? And also, is there something like totally missing that we're totally missing the question here?
Okay.
I'll put the text of the question up on the screen again.
Sure. Okay, actually, first off, one thing just I didn't say this explicitly before.
Yeah.
The question is also meant to be asked in like complete respectfulness, and just if anything didn't come off sounding respectful, which didn't sound like it.
Yeah, it sounded like it, yeah.
With that in context. To me, it seemed like there was something more, I think, to the that need for that feeling of like the push toward, I might not say this well, and I'll have to come back to it. That religious push toward like feeling better so that you can then think, but then that conflict with the recognition that you've done something wrong, and then the usual like religious, at least the prior experience of the religious push of like feel better and then you'll be okay and then move on. But instead from just the feel better being what it's all about, like actual intellectual recognition of things, and then from there like being able to proceed, yet at the same time you can't just jump into intellectual. There's also like a recognition of the emotional aspect of being a human being.
Right. Okay. So let me just try responding to that. Let me put this in my own words, which is, to what extent in general and with religion in specific is it important to address your emotional needs / like conflicts prior to addressing the intellectual?
Yes, that was.
You don't have to agree with me.
Okay,
that's just how I'm hearing the question right now.
Yeah, okay, that was one of the ways I've been hearing the question also.
Okay, so let me respond to that, and then we can branch outwards if there's time. And maybe this is just because I just came off the heels of reading footnote 4. But I think, first of all, I think that you have to differentiate between, there's like what's his name's hierarchy of needs? Maslow, right? So there are different kinds of needs, and even in emotional needs, there's different kinds of things. So for example, I do think, and I'm saying this based on my own thoughts, but also with my experience of like teaching, there are people who have, emotional conflicts, and then the people who have emotional trauma. Now, I don't know where to draw the line, but I do know that if people are dealing with trauma, either in terms of their relationships with other people or the relationships with God or religion, trauma needs a different approach. Okay. And that does need to be handled first in terms of like, you can't take certain steps without dealing with that. And when I say dealt with first, I don't mean like you can totally solve all trauma and then like start, investigating religion. I mean like that needs to be at the forefront. Okay. So having differentiated trauma from just emotional conflicts, I think that because of what the Rav said about religion, I think to try to address the emotional conflicts and pain first, either is going to be ineffective because you're just like putting a Band-Aid on something and not really dealing with the issues, and you're just like denying or running away from like problems, retreating into fantasy, or so like at worst it's going to be harmful, at middle it's going to be ineffective, and at best it's going to be passing up on opportunities for growth, because these types of conflicts are like the biggest sources of growth, so I'd say like to address like the questioner's need or like what the questioner is asking about, like the need to like, I got to take care of the emotion before going into this. that need often comes, I think, from just a desire to escape pain, and I think that that's like a missed opportunity and ineffective and possibly harmful. Yeah, Sean?
Yeah, I would just add in terms of the dimension, the other side of the question, which seems to be then how do you, if you're not going to go for the emotionally satisfying route, then how are you going to go through a process to get through this?
Yeah.
So Judaism has a great system of tshuva, which
Right.
is all about, exploring what brought me to do this thing.
Right.
What were the different factors? How can I work on myself to then not be that type of person? And then once you're no longer that person, you don't need to feel guilty about being that person because you've actually made a transition to being a different type of person.
Okay, that's a great point. I was gonna make that point through a different route, which is just quick review of the definition of tshuva. And I've given a lot of shiurim on this, I think even this year. Just let's go over the steps of tshuva really quickly. Always feels weird doing this in like January. I know tshuva is relevant all year round, but I had just a flashback to beginning of the school year. Yeah. All right. Umahi had tshuva. What is tshuva? So the tshuva being defined poorly as repentance, but tshuva is really a process of return. Okay, that's like the best definition. So first step is you need to recognize the sin, which he doesn't say, but that's like the premise. You need to, actually, I know I want to read this because I want to bring something up. The sinner needs to abandon his sin. Remove it from his plans, and resolve in his heart to not do it again. I'm not going to read the psukim right now. He should also regret having transgressed. And call God as his witness that he won't return to the sin forever. And then he needs to confess verbally the things that he said in his heart, or if this is another person, then that's when you ask them for forgiveness and appease them. Okay, so those 6 steps. So abandon the sin, remove it from your plans, resolve not to do it again, regret what you did, call God as your witness that you won't return to it, and then confess. Okay, so the point I want to bring this in for is to say that I think, whenever I've taught this to people and I ask them, what the steps of tshuva are, and I ask them where regret should come in, they usually say, like, the regret comes at the very beginning, like the feelings of regret and pain and stuff and I point out that no, regret comes after you've done the first 3 steps of abandoning the sin, removing it from your plans, and resolving not to do it again. And in fact, lest you think I'm just projecting into this, the pasuk the Rambam quotes is ki acharei shuvi nichamti. After I have done teshuva, I have regretted. So what does that mean? So again, I gave a whole share on this, but in 2 minutes, there's 2 types of shame, regret, and guilt. There's the kind you feel, the pangs you feel when you first sin or when you first realize that you sinned, okay? And that can be an impetus to do tshuva, but that's not part of the tshuva process. Then there's the regret that comes after you've engaged in the first 3 steps of the tshuva process and at least gotten as far enough to be able to stop doing the sin, remove it from your plans, and then commit to not doing it again. That comes as a result of the knowledge of like, wow, I see what I've done. And like, I was so immature, or I was so like in the grips of my emotion, or I was so like ignorant, that type of guilt and shame and regret is like a more productive thing. So I think if you try to address that initial pang of guilt, you're trying to shortcut the process, whether it's between you and God or whether it's between you and other people. And like, you're gonna be skipping over the whole tshuva process, like Sean was saying, which is like there to like not just repair the bad, but like to make you into a better person, and so I think that it's important to recognize where this falls out in here. Side point that I wanted to bring this up for is I was listening to an episode of Ramit Sethi's, I always forget the name of the podcast. I Will Teach You to Be Rich, which is the couples counseling about money. And this is a case where like the husband was money conscious and the wife like refused to think about money, and like she was like, kind of like keeping them in poverty by her overspending. And so like he asked her point blank, the host asked her point blank, like, can you commit? I forgot what the exact question was, something like, can you commit to thinking about money or something like that, like it was more specific than that. And she said, I realized that I need to like be better about money. Okay. And he said, I didn't ask you that. I asked you, can you commit, and I haven't gotten this far on the podcast, but he said in the video version, he has like a commitment counter, where like I think all the times when he like asks her, can you commit, and she like avoids the question. And when I thought of that, I was like people ask the question, what's the difference between abandoning the sin and removing it from your plans versus committing to not doing it again? I think there is definitely a phase where you recognize, like he says in the podcast, a lot of people say, I need to go to the gym, but that's very different than like committing to go to the gym, you know? So I think that those are two aspects in the tshuva process that snapped into clarity when I heard that example. Okay, obviously there's a lot more to discuss here, but I got to go now. So maybe we can take this up, not that we have a scheduled Q&A, but like, you know, take this up in some other format. But I hope that's at least part of the question answered. Okay, all right, this is good. I wish we had more regular Q&As, but such as, not life, such as the semester. All right.
Thank you.
Later, yeah.